folks in the room, and good morning, good evening, good afternoon, good night to maybe some of our global Ford family and friends. My name is Brittany Paris. I'm a Global Grants Manager at the Ford Foundation. I've been here for 6 years. I'm also the co-lead of SIS, which is Sisters in Solidarity. The mission of SIS is to create a vibrant community that celebrates joy as a fundamental pillar, offering leadership, networking, and community building opportunities specifically tailored for the advancement of professional Black women at the Ford Foundation. Through joy, we empower our members to thrive in their careers and create meaningful connection. Before we get started, I just want to say thank you to Wanjiru, to Michelle, and the B-WEL team for this much needed space and conversation. I am delighted to see such a distinguished group of people gather here today. We are committed to fostering growth, empowerment, and success in our professional journeys. As we know, the dynamic roles of leadership and mentoring can play a powerful role in one's success. Despite contorted efforts of many organizations to nurture women's talents, specifically Black women, there's a strong support network becomes essential, whether it's to employ resources groups like SIS or structure-sponsored programs. Today, we are here to explore how strategic partnerships can pave the way for career advancement and fulfillment. Beyond merely forming professional connections, these relationships offer individual support, sponsorship, and particularly access to opportunities, advocacy, and visibility in all are crucial for career growth. So today, I invite you to actively participate, share your experiences, be present, learn from each other, smile, maybe a little tear. And family, thank you for joining us, and let's make the most of our time together. I'm going to pass it to Michelle and Wanjiru. Thank you.
Hello, everyone, and to friends joining us from around the world. I'm going to look at the camera. I think we had about 50 people who signed up to join, more than 50 people who signed up to join virtually. Welcome to you all, and thank you for joining us from wherever in the world that you are joining. And to all of you in the room, thank you to colleagues at Ford Foundation who have joined us here, and thank you to our external guests who've also joined us. My name is Dr. Wanjiru Kamau-Rutenberg, and I'm the founder and CEO of B-WEL. And I'm going to get my act together. B-WEL is Black Women in Executive Leadership, and we are focused on improving the numbers, experiences, and impact of Black women in leadership, all with an eye to centering the experiences of Black women to transform, to surface lessons, and that then transform institutions to make them better places to live and work. I have a couple of things that I want to do before I introduce our speaker. First is to talk a bit about the master classes, of which this is one. B-WEL does 3 things. The first is, and we call them the 9 C's. The first thing that we do is we are creating a connected community, and this is an intergenerational global community of Black women in solidarity with each other, a community of mutual learning and support and mutual support. The second thing that we do is we're collecting, collating, and curating Black women's wisdom on leadership. A lot of times experiences, what we know about leadership, often that literature, that body of knowledge hasn't centered Black women's experiences. And we're learning really interesting things when we talk to Black women about the things that Black women go through on their leadership journey. And for example, some of the things that we're learning is the literature doesn't surface the ways, and only when you talk to Black women do you start to appreciate the ways, for example, mediation is being used in institutions, not as a strategy to support leaders, but as a weapon to off-ramp Black women from leadership. we often then don't have terms to describe experiences that we as Black women perceive to be individual experiences, yet are actually systemic and systematic experiences. And so creating new knowledge, things like naming the sapphire caricature, which is this stereotype of Black women being aggressive and abrasive, and the way the sapphire caricature not only makes Black women's professional lives incredibly difficult because you're trying to navigate the politics of likability, not for something that you did or something that you are, but because folks have decided your being Black and female makes you aggressive in their mind. So you're there trying to be like, no, but I'm really nice. But you also don't want to be ditzy and incompetent. And so these are systemic challenges, and often we think these are individual experiences, but yet they're actually systemic challenges. And so it's important to create knowledge and systemize knowledge on what is happening to Black women. And the third thing that we do is what we call catalyzing connections for change, collaborations for change. And what we're doing there is to say, we have the community of Black women, we have this knowledge that we're generating, how do we act in the world to actually drive change? That's the action forward part of our work. The masterclass series, the series of masterclasses that we do, of which this is one aimed at creating community. I really need every single one of you to walk here out of this room with a new friend, with a new addition to your network. That's an important part of the community piece of the work. We really hope that you will learn something from the conversation that Michelle and I are going to have. And finally, we hope that from the things that you learn, you will partner and collaborate to do something in the world to change institutions, to drive change in institutions. So that's what the masterclass series, we hope, does in this. And so, in moving forward, let's start off with a poll. It's a hard exam, huh? Okay. Oh, there's the results. Okay. Thank you, Jessica. Have you ever had a career sponsor? Yes, no, but I'm interested. Okay, great. So we're looking at a lot of people, about half, say they have had a sponsor, which is fantastic. Okay, if yes, how would you describe the race and gender of your sponsor? Oh, this is interesting.
Can I just say, pay attention to the same as me number when we speak. Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Can I just say, can you hear me? Pay attention to the same as me number as we get into our conversation.
Okay, how important? It looks like people do believe that sponsorship is important, very important. 11 out of 14 people are saying it's very important. Okay, understanding. Oh, this is kind of hard to read.
Oh, yeah, right.
Rank order.
So strongly disagree. So, if we're understanding of my career goals, strongly agree. I actively cultivate and nurture relationships. I actually cultivate and nurture my relationships with mentors, sponsors, and allies. So this is interesting. So neutral. The neutral and strongly disagree is interesting. So we'll be talking about overall satisfaction neutral. So I think we're all in the right place because we're going to be talking about all of these factors today and how to make it more strongly agree.
Okay, so we've already gotten into it, but let me introduce Michelle, who's my partner in this dance today. Michelle Awuku-Tatum is founder of My Factor Coaching and Consulting, an executive coaching and leadership development practice that partners with Fortune 500s, nonprofits, and founder-led ventures. As an executive coach, Michelle guides leaders and teams through transformative coaching conversations. These are often conversations they may never have had with themselves or those they need to have with others. She works with leaders and teams to gain the clarity you need, empowering them to navigate challenges, lead inclusively, and achieve a shared vision. Michelle believes a leader's identity shapes their mindset, leadership style, and team interactions. My Factor's coaching approach lies in the intersection of identity and inclusive leadership. It goes beyond the what to the who. This understanding is core to the approach and goes beyond the traditional coaching models. She holds an MBA from the Kellogg School of Management and a bachelor's degree in process technology and management studies from London South Bank University in England. Rooted in Ghana and raised in England, Michelle calls New York City home with her husband and 2 daughters. Welcome, Michelle, and thank you so much.
Thank you. It's so good to be here, and it's always good to be in rooms that look like this because, as you can imagine, in the work that I do, I don't get to spend much time in rooms that look like this. So, thank you.
It's so great to have you, and thank you for agreeing to do this and to be in conversation. So, as I said, this is going to be more of a conversation than a speech. So, let's get started. What is a strategic relationship, and how do sponsorships fit into this definition? And I'm going to tie that to a second question, which is, we hear these terms all the time, but what's the difference between role modeling, sponsorship, and mentorship? Is there a difference?
So feel free to interrupt me if I go on for too long. Right? Okay. So when you think about strategic relationships, I want you to think about your career advancement network, right? And your career advancement network includes strategic relationships with people who support the future you and what am I doing? Is this better? Okay. Should I start again, or did you hear? Okay. Yeah, good. So that support the future you as well as your organizational goals. The sponsors fit into that because the sponsors are helping change how people perceive you, right? Particularly for some of you who have been at your organizations for a long time, you're seen a certain way. So a sponsor changes how you're perceived as well as they leverage their influence to help you advance with your career goals. So that's sort of like the strategic relationships element. Now, role models, mentors, and sponsors, what's the difference? So, I like to think of role models as friends in your head, right? Like, you may not know them, but they are people that you look up to, that you aspire to be, and that inspire you. Like I said, you may not know them, but and the information tends to flow one way from the role model to you. The caution I like to give is because I think sometimes people look at role models and they get caught up in the glossy stories, and they don't really take into account the challenges that role model has been through or their growth edges. So I always say it's really important to think about how you cultivate your skills, how you shape and form your leadership identity, and that's where mentors come in. Right? So mentors I like to think of as part of your career growth circle. Right? So these are people who help you develop your skills. They tend to be more senior than you. They may have more tenure than you at your organization. And they give you their time, advice, support to get through your day-to-day. So they're your right now type of support. Now, sponsors differ, right? Because sponsors have more influence than mentors. And so what a sponsor does is a sponsor leverages their influence and social capital to help you with your career goals. Not the challenge, the opportunity with sponsors or the difference with sponsors is that it really is a collaborative relationship. You share your career goals, you get to know them, they get to know you, and they're there to really help you achieve your goals as well as your business goals as well. So I hope I covered all the elements.
Are there any questions in the room, on the Zoom?
That's a great question. So the point that I missed was that when you think about sponsors, the best types of sponsor relationships are formalized, right? So they find you. However, when I share some of the data research, you have to find them too. And you have to cultivate that relationship, and you have to get a sense of, are they really for you? So there's a lot of window dressing when it comes to sponsorship, right? Sponsors do get a benefit from it, right? The stats, research shows that if the sponsor sponsors someone, that they boost their promotion chances by about 40 to 50%, right? So you need to make sure that you have the right sponsor. And we'll get into that, I think, as we... Did I answer your question?
Yeah.
So, a bit of both, yeah.
Oh, this is working. Okay. What role do strategic relationships play in shaping career trajectories and fostering professional growth?
Yeah, so there are a number of elements. So when you think about strategic relationships and sponsors in particular, there's visibility and advocacy, right? So sponsors provide you with that visibility. All of a sudden you become that person. I'm not saying that this is you, Brittany, but when you're waiting for someone to find you, you have your head down. They will not find you. You're doing the work that you need to do. The sponsor actually creates that visibility. So even though you're doing your work, your name is being mentioned in rooms. They advocate for you. The other element is knowledge sharing and resources. So it's so interesting when you meet people and they say they have a sponsor and you start to ask a few questions. When you have a sponsor, they pretty much open up the curtain around what is the promotion process. I'm always so floored when I work with someone and they say, look, I've been trying to get promoted for the last 2 to 3 years, and they have no idea how one gets promoted, right? Sponsors have access to that information. They've gone through it. So that's a huge element. Guidance, confidence, and support. These sponsors have your back, right? And when you're going through challenges, they are a sounding board and they can provide some guidance there. They can provide support. They also boost your confidence because they see your potential and they're invested in that potential. And then protection, right? So there are a number of factors in terms of why we need sponsors to defend us. Particularly when you think about Black women in particular, we tend to be in the jobs that are not resourced. We tend to be, the glass cliff is real, right? So we tend to be in leading companies that are in crisis situations. You cannot go into those situations and lead business as usual. You have to be able to take risks. And so the sponsor provides cover and enables you to take risks as well. And they defend you when you take those risks.
As the questions are coming through, let me ask you another question. How can Black women executives effectively navigate the process of seeking sponsorship for the very first time with success? And a sub-question of that is, what are some of the common challenges that Black women face in executive roles when seeking sponsorship, and how can those challenges be overcome?
Before we get into the how, we do have to talk about the challenges, right? And so there are challenges, so there are challenges that are within our control and challenges that are not. So we can't avoid the fact that over white men CEOs lead over 70% of corporate and nonprofit institutions. And I think as of today, we have 2 out of 52 women CEOs who lead Fortune 500 companies that are Black, right? So when you look at the leadership representation, that's one challenge. And then we also have the challenge of sponsor demographics, right? So 67% of sponsors are white. And then you find that 3 out of 4 sponsors tend to like proteges, which is what all of you would be if you're not sponsors, tend to like proteges that look like them. So when I said pay attention to the same as me, most of the sponsors out there are white, right? And if they're white men, they tend to sponsor white men, right? So those are challenges that are outside of our control, yet organizations like B-WEL, like what I do at my coaching, we're trying to change that, but that's going to take a while. And then there are other challenges that are within our control, right? And so, and there are a couple that come to mind in terms of like how our approach to networking, right? So I'm a proud product of Ghanaian parents. Like, it's not surprising that when my parents, aunties, and uncles moved, they all moved to similar areas, right? There's a sticking together strategy that Black people follow, right? And I'm going to make some broad sweeping statements, but please, the caveat or the asterisk is that it doesn't apply to everybody. So if it applies to you, take it, and if it doesn't, just swipe it to the side. So we tend to follow this sticking together strategy. Now, we use that for our professional networking too, right? So research found that when you look at Black professionals' networks, they're predominantly Black. Whereas our Latinx and Asian American counterparts, they use a blending in strategy. The blending in strategy is aligning with people who have the power, right? We don't do that. I'm saying that one of the things that we have to think about is still having that sticking together strategy and also the blending in strategy. And I'm not saying that it's easy, but we have to be a bit more intentional about it. And then the other thing is around, the other factor is around what we disclose, right? So research shows that we limit disclosure of information, right? When you're in a company where you're underrepresented, only 9 out of 10 women do not disclose any information about themselves. When you're in a company where there is representation, 7 out of 10 women do not disclose. In order to have these conversations where Bob, Bill, Dick, or Harry is supporting you, we have to start disclosing. We have to start having a conversation. So those are some of the challenges that I want us to think about. Now, in terms of the how, I'm just going to find my notes. My notes keep me on track, and I don't go down paths. So, in terms of the how do we set up, you said how do we establish those relationships, right? So, a lot of this is doing the work ourselves first, right? So we have to sort of like figure out, you know that map where it says you are here, right? So we have to figure out where are we, and then where are we going, right? So what is our desired future state, and what is our current state? And then when we think about that gap, what are the skills, resources, and experiences that we need to expose ourselves to? So that's the first part of what we have to think about in terms of how. And then we have to really think about our network. And I encourage people to do an audit network, right? Who in your network right now can support you with access to these skills, access to industry knowledge, can support you with that next move, who can give you that high stakes assignment. And then once you've identified those people, then going to them and having that conversation and sharing your story and sharing your vision. Now, the thing with sharing our story is we're going to have to do it over and over again. So you give them a little bit of your story. You don't give them a whole shebang, right? Like, give them parts. And I say snippets because, one, people are forgetful. But you think about what elements of my story might appeal to Bob. I'm using Bob, Dick, and Harry because, but what elements might appeal to Bob? Because, and it might be, these are true things. Like, it might be that you went to a camp. It might be that you play squash and Bob plays squash. You have to think about what are the elements that I can find that connect me with this person. And then you have to be comfortable sharing. You also, one of the things I want you to think about also is that when you're establishing these relationships, you have to determine whether you can grow to trust that person. Grow to trust emphasis. If I was writing a paper, I would have that bold, flashing lights, grow to trust. Because sometimes we trust too quickly, right? That's just human knowledge. But we have to really understand, are they going to be that person that speaks my name? Because the pet to threat phenomenon is true, right? Sometimes we have sponsors and mentors in particular, and we start to shine, and it causes issues, right? So we have to are they comfortable? Now, you also want to do some testing too. So, one of the things, when we talk about privilege, white men don't tend to notice microaggressions. They don't tend to notice bias, right? They don't. They don't have to. So, when I say grow to trust, an example would be, you're in a meeting, you're going to that meeting, and Larry always cuts you off. And when Larry cuts you off, then he takes the floor, and you kind of lose control of that conversation. So what you would say to Bob is, Bob, one of the things I'd like to do today is really work on making sure that I get my points across, and I have 7 points. And I'm pretty sure Larry's going to cut me off at point number 2. And that's happened in the past, and whilst I've tried to get back into the conversation, I haven't been able to get back into the conversation. So on this occasion, if it happens, I need to know that you have my back, and that you'll take the spotlight back to me, and so that I can get the 7 points across. And then you add the bit that Bob would be more interested in. This will help us get this blah, 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 something that what's in it for him, right? So once you've been able to do that, you then get to test, does he follow through, right? So when he follows through, then you share a little bit more, right? The other thing is, like, these relationships just don't take place in the office, right? They take place when you're on the road. They take place like when you invite them to an event or to where you go to something, like have these shared experiences, right? So it feels a little broad what I'm saying, but I hope you get the sense that it's bit by bit, like you test, came through, I can share a bit more. Test again, came through, I can share a bit more. Till at a certain point they know everything that they know that there is to know about you. Right?
Thank you.
Here's the thing, I don't necessarily think junior professionals have sponsors, they have mentors, because you're developing your skills. You don't even know who you, like, at a certain stage, you like trying to figure out who am I and where am I on my leadership journey and where am I going, right? So you're really developing skills. At this stage, you're really thinking about what do I want to become known for, right? What is it that, and what do I want to become known for? What can people count on me for? So I really think of that as a mentoring relationship. Now that's not to say, let's say you get picked to do a high stakes assignment or a stretch assignment, and you get to meet get to meet senior professionals along the way. You should definitely start to cultivate those relationships because they could potentially become sponsors down the road, right? So I'm struggling to answer the question a bit, but in terms of what you could provide, like the sponsor, you can provide them with information. You can provide them with trends. Like, one of the things I love doing, like when I'm coaching younger professionals, by the time I finish coaching someone that's more tech savvy than me, my business changes. Let me actually ask you, right? What are some of your interests, and what do you think you have that's of value that you can offer? The response was, her mentor likes events, and so she has a newsletter, and she had access to a newsletter, so she shares those events with her mentor. It's that simple. It doesn't actually take any effort for you to do that, and it's very natural. I'm not saying go and get new skills, go and start doing new things. You've got to do things that are natural, otherwise it won't happen. So in terms of like how do we reframe? So one of the things, how do we reframe it, sponsorship as a strategic relationship? So one of the things that I've noticed when I have conversations, like the 50% of you that said you have sponsors, whether that was here or online, is when we really get into it, what we discover is that sponsor actually isn't really a sponsor. They're more like a role model or mentor, right? And so the way I help them reframe it is sort of like using that tour guide analogy, right? Like, you actually have to put some work in it, right? So if you really want to think about, if you want someone to support you, you really actually have to do the exploration yourself, right? To figure out where you're going. And then how they can support you. And then you really want to be prescriptive about, this is the support that I need, right? And then at a certain point in that relationship, can you support me, right? Like, what will it look like if you support me, right? What will I see if you support me? So that's when I think about reframing, that's how I think about it.
In seeking sponsorship, but how can Black women executives navigate the power dynamics and potential biases when seeking sponsorship opportunities? We've talked about the sapphire character. caricature? How can we navigate those dynamics, those biases?
So we talked about growing to trust the sponsors, so I won't cover that. It's always not evident, it's also not evident that your sponsor is working on your behalf, right? So you truly do want to ask them questions and test for things, right? So are they looking for opportunities to boost your confidence? Do they publicly support your advancement? Are they following up and identifying opportunities, right, that are in line with your motivations? Or are they making recommendations that are really not aligned, right? This is like you've said, I'm on the path to CFO, and they're saying, have you thought about this compliance opportunity? And you're thinking, compliance, fine, they don't match, right? So it's really thinking about, are they really there to help? Are they raising your profile and visibility? You know when they're raising your profile and visibility. All of a sudden, people that you weren't connected with want to spend time with you, or are actually saying, that was a great point that you made in that meeting. Like, can we follow up and have some coffee and talk about it a bit more? The other thing is that because of the leadership representation, right, and the sticking together strategy, and this is going to sound a little controversial, we can't just have sponsors that look like us or that are Black men, right? Because the glass cliff is real, right? And so we tend to lose our jobs quicker and at a higher rate than others, right? So we need to really think about how do we have multiple sponsors. So this is a bit in line with your question. So I always like to say we're going to have 2 internal sponsors and 1 external sponsor. That external sponsor helps you see yourself in a very different way. Now, with the sponsors, when we think about it, we can't get around it, right? We all need white men in our networks as sponsors, but we can also have women too, right? You have to make sure you go through those questions, and I'm happy to share those questions as well. But we have to go through the questions to get a sense of who's there. So I always like to say, focus on long tenured women at the organization. It's so interesting how people change as they're coming to the end of their career and what they're willing to do, because they start to think more about their legacy and their impact, right? So focus on long tenured women and leverage their social capital, because that creates that trust, right? It actually accelerates the trust that you need to cultivate with your sponsor.
That is so deep.
Yeah.
That is so strategic, so actionable.
When I say engage Bob in ways in which he can disrupt bias for you, I'm not talking about a savior complex, right? I'm talking about finding true allies that are there for you, right? So I wanted to make sure, and then the last thing. So, and this is a whole conversation, Wanjiru, that I'm happy to have at another time, but it's around feedback and it's around personality, right? So whilst it's important for your sponsor, to have an understanding of your personality, as Black women and Black men, you will get a lot of feedback that speaks to your personality, that speaks to your interpersonal dynamics. How I do things might be perceived as aggressive, but Bob is confident and bold, right? So we have to really be able to pay attention to that language, right? Personality feedback sounds like you're too abrasive, you're really aggressive, you're too nice, or you're personable, right? So I always say it's really important to understand the language of your company. What is your leadership competencies? What are the leadership competencies that people are or should be following at your company? What are the values? Understanding that language helps you frame things, helps you frame how you're acting and comporting yourself, right? So, and it might sound like, how do I say this without, it might sound like one of the values is to lead with grace, right? One of the values is to lead with grace. And you might say, so you're in a situation and you keep on getting that "you're too nice" comment, and you might say, I'm thinking about how we center the value of grace in this conversation as we think about how to approach X, right? That frames your action, right? Like, not that I'm being too nice, but it's actually because I want to make sure that we're moving in alignment with our values. So I think that's really important to figure out what the language is of the organization. Hopefully that answered a few questions.
Yes. Yeah, and with 4 minutes on the formal calendar or timeline, I want to actually skip to, are there emerging trends or shifts in the professional landscape that are influencing the practice of sponsorship? And I'm actually going to be sneaky because I'm going to ask another question, which is, does sponsorship look different when you're earlier in your career versus later and more senior?
Yeah, I do think it looks different, and I don't feel like sponsorship is as prevalent early in your career. But what you are, because you're more sort of like aligned with the mentor because you're developing skills. But what I do think is that at that stage, you are starting to think about who could potentially sponsor me down the road. So one of the things I always like to say is, like, people leave organizations, stay in touch with them. It's easier to stay in touch with people once they've left because they you know what, they also have intel and how to survive at that organization, and they're no longer there now, right? And some, if it's a contentious relationship or where you feel like there was a small pet to threat, that disappears when they leave, right? Now trends. So the trends, I think AI is something I think about, right? And I know it sounds strange, but I think we as people, not we as in, I think professionals may start to think that we can use AI to answer all of our questions, right? And may start to de-emphasize the importance of real relationships that are contextually based, right? I think AI will be used to make some of these matches, and I don't like that. I think it's really important for us to have, like to your point, Brittany, it's for us to have a say in these types of relationships rather than an algorithm deciding it. What else? I think, so there are a couple of other things here. The rise of virtual work, right? Like, how do you cultivate relationships when you never see Bob? You're never actually in the same physical room as Bob. Mm-hmm. This is something that I'm thinking about, right, as a future of work. But it's something that trend is something that we're going to have to figure out, how do we start cultivating these relationships? Which means that, you know, is it going into the office more? Is it going to a conference that Bob is keynoting? Is it like just thinking about what are the ways in which we can be intentional? Is it that you have season tickets to something, or Bob has season tickets, and you say, I want to see the game one day. When can we go to that game? And then there's another aspect of the sponsorship premium. And the sponsorship premium is this notion that when you have a sponsor, you actually make more money, right? And so when you look at sponsorship premiums, when a Black woman has a sponsor, well, actually, let me just look at my notes here so I keep myself honest. So, but that sponsorship premium is not equally distributed, right? And so if you have a sponsor, you're paid 11.6% more than those who have a sponsor, right? But if you're a Black woman, you earn about 5.1% more, right, than your friends or colleagues who do not have a sponsor. But here's the thing: if you have a sponsor that is Black, you make 11.3% less than your colleagues. There's a sponsorship penalty that they're not talking about, right? And I worry what this does, right, when you think about as we move forward, right? Like, do we start to move to, okay, I can only be with sponsors where I'm going to earn money? Well, we still need Black women and Black people in our network, because if they've done it before, if they've gone to a place that we haven't gone to, they're going to help us get there too. So that's something that I think about. I haven't really.
That's crazy. It costs you money to have a Black sponsor?
Yeah.
That might
11.3% less. I have a lot to say about this, but
okay. I definitely want to continue this. I want to make a transition at this point because we're at the top of the hour. This conversation is continuing, but it's important that I do this, especially for our friends who are online. Can you click to last? Yes. Please pick up your phone, scan that QR code, tell us how we did. This is really important to us because we use the results of every masterclass to inform the next masterclass. And this is the first time we're doing a hybrid in-person and virtual. We've been doing these only virtually. And so the feedback from those of you who are here in the room and the feedback for those of you who joined virtually is really important. I'm also going to encourage you to please follow B-WEL on LinkedIn. I know I'm looking at who are my sponsors and reviewing the list and reviewing how I'm showing up. And, you know, like I tend to jump into full trust and I don't test. And I'm like, oh, there's so much learning. So encourage you once the recording is up again to go ahead and listen to it again because there's so much that's coming up. And so with that, I'm going to mark an end because usually what we do is the recording that goes on YouTube will usually end here at this moment. And now we shift into a Q&A.
Recording stop.